Bank of Jamaica Governor Brian Winter says falling oil prices have had a positive impact on Jamaica's inflation rate and has revised the island's inflation rate downwards. In this exclusive interview, the governor says the lower inflation rate should also have a positive impact on the Jamaican dollar and indeed the life of every Jamaican. I first asked the governor about the impact of lower oil prices on inflation.
Well, oil price internationally going down is very positive for inflation. It does mean that Jamaica's inflation environment has changed significantly. Inflation at December for last calendar year, was 6.4%, compared to 9.5% a year before. That's a significantly lower. And more important, I think, when we think about oil, is how will that flow through into prices in the coming period. We now expect that inflation for the fiscal year is likely to come in below our target range of 7 to 9%. Looking ahead, the bank forecasts inflation for 6 to 9 months ahead. That's how we set monetary policy. That's how we make that's the basis on which we make our decisions about interest rates. And when we look at inflation to September this year, we are expecting inflation to be between 3 and 5% for September 2015, and that is the 12-month or the annual inflation rate at September.
The governor is cautious on the projection.
That is based on where oil has reached now.
No,
yeah.
Okay.
And yes, you're quite correct. If oil prices retrace their steps, then it will have an impact on inflation.
I asked Mr. Winter, what should the average Jamaican worker expect from lower inflation rates?
Inflation does the most damage to the poorest. Inflation hurts those on fixed incomes, people who can't vary what they earn, and that tends to be the lowest paid and those on pensions, those who are closest to subsistence. So lower inflation is better for that category of person and matters more than it does for those at the higher end of the income scale, who have more ability to switch products, to defer expenditure, and make decisions to protect themselves by hedging and so forth against inflation. High inflation makes it much harder for people to enter into contracts with each other and expect at the end of the contract to sell a good, a service. You're making a door or a wooden chair or something like that. You contract it at a price. With the higher inflation the more uncertain that contracting process is going to be. The lower inflation is, the more everybody is able to know what they're going to get, know what they're going to pay. Lower inflation has another important consequence, and that is it reduces uncertainty about what the exchange rate is going to be. So when the Jamaican inflation rate is low, then the likelihood of the exchange rate to depreciate and lose its value diminishes considerably. So achieving a low inflation rate is good for maintaining the value of the currency.
Here's a question that the average Jamaican regularly asks me. If the economy is on the right track, why is the Jamaican dollar weakening?
Well, I think we have to put it into some context. So first, the exchange rate depreciated this fiscal year so far, up to yesterday, by a little over 5%. Inflation in Jamaica was, up to December, as we said earlier, 6.4%. So that depreciation is quite a bit slower than what it was a year before, when it was about a little over 8%. So what we can expect as inflation is lowered is we can expect that depreciation rate to also be lower. And already at 5%, I think this was the kind of degree of depreciation that people were relatively insensitive to a few years ago. I think people are very concerned now, and understandably so, in a context of the very challenging economic environment. Critical, I believe, at this point is to ensure that people have jobs, to ensure that they have earning power, and if that earning power is buoyant, then it makes a lower and lower rate of inflation much more valuable to them. And that is the condition under which we will see the exchange rate movements slow down even further. And in fact, based on what I'd mentioned earlier as to where we expect inflation to be during this next 6 months, we see the basis for depreciation of the currency to slow further still than where we are today.
Good news there for the average Jamaican and business on a whole. Do email your thoughts on this feature to me at allmedia6@cwjamaica.com or send comments via Twitter at OwenJamesJA.